Now, it's obvious that the French language has a lot of verbs, but you don't need to learn them all one by one, because as it turns out, there are patterns in the verbs. If you visualize all of the verbs in their indefinite form, you'll soon realize that despite being really different, there are only 3 different ways in which they end. There are the verbs that end with er, like trouver, manger, parler, the verbs that end with ir, like remplir, réussir, partir, and the verbs that end with re, like croire, faire, connaître. And as a matter of fact, this is exactly the way that the French differentiate their verbs. The verbs that end with er are called verbs of the first group. Most verbs that end with ir are called verbs of the second group. And verbs that end with re and other irregular verbs are called verbs of the third group. Now, the French don't separate these verbs only because they have different endings in their indefinite form. They actually separate them this way because each group of verbs follows a different pattern of conjugation. The verbs of the first group have a pattern of conjugation, the verbs of the second group have another pattern, and the verbs of the third group have another pattern. In this video, we are only going to look at the conjugation of the verbs of the first group. There's something important that you should know about the verbs in French. Verbs in French have 2 parts. The root part of the verb, which is called lexeme, and the changing part of the verb, which is called inflection. Er, ir, and re are all inflections. So if you want to know the root part of the verb, if you want to know the lexeme, you just eliminate the inflection and whatever remains is the lexeme, the never changing part of the verb. I know that this is not too strange for you because English also uses inflections. In fact, that's why French and English are called inflective languages. Now, if you want to conjugate, you first have to detect the lexeme of the verb, and then add the correct inflection depending on the pronoun. Let's conjugate the verb parler. First, we have to detect the lexeme, which is parle. And now, we need to add the proper inflections. Now, with je, you're going to use the inflection E. So you're just going to take the lexeme and you're going to add that inflection, which is going to be E, and that's how you conjugate with je. Je parle, with an E, okay? So that's what you do with je. Now, with tu, you're going to add the inflection ES. U-E-S. With il and with elle, you're going to add the inflection E. With nous, you're going to add the inflection O and S. With vous, you're going to add the inflection EZ. And with il and elle, in the plural form, you are going to add the inflection ENT. But how it is pronounced? Okay, so imagine that the line is here, and it is je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle. And you're going to realize something really strange. Pretty much everything is pronounced the same except for nous and vous. I know that je parle and tu parles. I know that tu parles, there's an S sound, but it is not pronounced. In fact, the E of je, the inflection of je, is not even pronounced. You just say parle. You end with that L sound. Je parle. The same goes for tu. Tu parles. You don't say tu parles. That's wrong. You say tu parles. You end with that L sound. With il and with elle is exactly the same. Il parle, end with that L sound. Elle parle, end with that L sound. Now with nous is different. With nous you actually have to pronunciate something else. With nous you have to say nous parlons. That S is not pronounced. Only the O and the N. Nous parlons. Now with vous, you have an E and a Z, and that E is actually pronounced. You have to say vous parlez. Don't say vous parlez. There are occasions in which you have to say vous parlez, but not here. Vous parlez. And finally we have il, elle, plural, which is exactly the same as the other ones. You end with the L sound. You say parle. You don't say parlent or something like that, or parlint or something like that. You just say parle, and with that L sound. And that's pretty much it. So it's je parle, tu parles, il parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle, il parle. And that's it. So maybe the tricky part here is writing them, which is actually not that hard. But, the pronunciation is actually extremely easy because pretty much all of them are the same. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, and the plural forms are the same. The only ones that change a little bit are nous, nous parlons, and vous, vous parlez. Remember, the final S in nous is not pronounced, and the final Z in vous is not pronounced. So yeah, that's pretty much the conjugation of the first verbs, of the verbs of the first group, sorry. And that works also with verbs like trouver, je trouve, tu trouves, il trouve, nous trouvons, vous trouvez, il trouve, elle trouve. Remember, you end with the final letter of the lexeme. Don't say the other ones. Don't say tu trouves or something like that. Okay, you can use that formula with pretty much all of the verbs of the first group, the verbs that end with er. But there are some details that we need to discuss about. Now, if you're a beginner, you don't care a lot about the details that I'm about to mention you, and it's probably that the following details are going to make French a little bit harder for you. But these details that I'm just going to talk about are, important in the conjugation. If you're a beginner, you probably don't really need them right now, but as you move forward, you are really going to need them because you need to write well. And these are the few details that we need to talk about the verbs that end with er. So first we have to take a look at the verbs that end with cer. C-E-R. For example, prononcer. Prononcer. That means to pronounce. Prononcer ends with C-E-R. You have to be careful. Why do we have to be careful? Okay, let's try to conjugate the verb prononcer the same way that we did with the other verbs. Let's start with je. Je prononce. Okay, no problem there. Tu prononces. No problem there. Il prononce, elle prononce. The same thing. Now with nous. Nous prononçons. No, that is incorrect. You don't say nous prononçons. And with that conjugation, you need to add a new kind of letter. Maybe it's probably a weird letter for you, but this letter is the C-cédille. C-cédille is not a letter that you're going to be able to find in English or even in Spanish, but the C-cédille is basically like the form of C that is actually pronounced like a S, with a S sound. Because in French, if you have C and O, that makes co. But if you have C cédille and O, that makes so. So you need to add a C cédille. You don't want to say nous prononçons, that doesn't exist. You have to say nous prononçons. So you add a C cédille in the conjugation of nous. And that's pretty much it with verbs with CER. The same thing goes with avancer. Okay, let's try. J'avance, tu avances, il avance, elle avance. The same thing, but nous avançons. No, nous avançons. C'est se dire. Don't forget that. The rest is the same. Vous avancez, ils avancent, elles avancent. Another verb. Commencer. Commencer. Je commence. Tu commences, il commence, elle commence, nous commençons with CCD. And that's pretty much all for the verbs that end with CER. Now we have the verbs that end with GER. Probably the perfect example of this is the verb manger. Manger, which means eat, to eat. Manger. Now, there's another thing that we have to take care of with a word like manger when it comes to nous. Let's try to conjugate manger as we did with the other verbs. We have je mange, okay, normal. Tu manges, perfect. Il mange, elle mange. Now with nous, nous mangon. In French, the sound G and O actually makes, like in English, go. But you don't want to say go, you want to say je. So the only way to create that sound in French is to add an extra E after the G. So it would be mangeon. Because if you don't add that extra E, you are going to say mangon. And that's not what the French wanted. And that's why you have to say mangeon. You have to add an extra E in the conjugation of nous, only in the conjugation of nous, because if you go with vous mangez, everything is perfect there, and if you go with il and elle plural, mange, everything is perfect there. So with the conjugation of nous, you have to add an extra E. Another group of verbs which you need to be careful with is the verbs that end with E consonant ER. E consonant ER. For example, a verb like acheter, it ends with E consonant ER. But why do you need to be careful? Why do you need to add, or what? You need to add an accent, actually. A grave accent, or l'accent grave. You need to add a grave accent in the first E of the conjugation of je, tu, il, elle, singular and plural. So for example, if we want to conjugate the verb acheter, it's going to be j'achète with the accent that we already discussed, the accent in the first E. Tu achètes with the accent in the first E also. Il achète, elle achète with accents in the first E. Nous achetons, no accent needed. Vous achetez, no accent needed. And ils achètent with the accent in the first E. And that's how you take care of the verbs that end with E consonant, ER. But what about if you have a verb like répéter? Répéter. Now, as you can see, répéter already has an accent. It actually has two accents in those two E. What are you going to do then? Well, as you can see, they have acute accent or acute accent. I don't know how it is actually pronounced in English. They have accents pointing in the other direction. So if you're actually going to conjugate them, the accent of the first E, you need to change that direction, and you need to transform that accent into a grave accent. You just need to put it in the other direction to transform it into a grave accent. So the conjugation is going to be je répète with the E in the other side. Tu répètes with the accent of the E in the other side. Il répète with the accent of the E in the other side. Elle répète, the accent in the other side. Nous répétons, you just leave the accents be, okay? Just let them face the other direction. Vous répétez, the same thing, you let the accents be, but with il and elle plural, you need to change the accent. Il répète, elle répète, with the accent facing the other way, a grave accent. What else? Verbs that end with E, L, ER. Okay, and you also need to be careful with these verbs like appeler, which is actually quite used if you're a beginner, appeler, je m'appelle, and all that. And with those verbs, you actually need to duplicate the L in the conjugation of je, tu, il, elle, singular, il, elle, plural. So, for example, with the verb appeler, you are going to say j'appelle with an extra L because it's je, j'appelle. Tu appelles with an extra L because it's tu. Elle appelle with singular, extra L. Nous appelons, you don't add an extra L, no extra L is needed. Vous appelez, no extra L is needed, but with il and elle, plural, you need an extra L. Il appelle, elle, ils appellent, elles appellent, with an extra L. And I think that's pretty much it. Those are, like the strange cases that you have to deal with those verbs, but now you know how to do it. That is pretty much it for this lesson. We are going to continue with the verbs of the second group, which are most of the verbs that end with IR, and I made a little course exercise, list of exercise or a course in this website called Memrise. I don't even know how it's actually pronounced, Memrise, something like that. And it's a good site, and I made a course relating the conjugation of the first verbs of French, and you can click it down below. It's going to send you to a link. I don't know if you have to subscribe to use them, but if you have to, just do it. I mean, it's free, and there's a bunch of exercise about the conjugation of the verbs in of the first group. And it might seem a little bit long, the exercise. They might seem a little bit long and repetitive, but repetition is what you need to acquire grammar. A lot of repetition, a lot of exercise, and a lot of conjugating and stuff like that in order for your brain to acquire everything. So try that exercise, try to finish it, don't be lazy, and that's going to be a way in which you are going to internalize that conjugation that I just taught you. So that's pretty much it. I will see you later, and bye.